But in order to do that, we're going to have to improve Hayward Field. And by now, I'm not only well, I'm actually an ex-architect. I let my license lapse because I get paid a whole lot more to do something else, which is I design stuff for Nike. I still love architecture. I still design. I design more buildings now and get them built than at any time when I was actually a licensed professional architect. Because you don't need to be licensed anymore. You just hire. So the reality, though, is that when this project popped up, Vin Lanana needed help. He was actually trying to figure out how to make Hayward Field bigger and better for the World Championships in 2017. And I've had a long relationship with Vin. And I said, look, I'll help. I spoke to Phil Knight. He said, great. So that was about 5 years ago, or about 6 years ago. And I started working just on my own time in the evenings, thinking about Hayward Field, thinking about what I would do to make it better and bigger, or in the proper sense, expandable to be bigger. I spent hundreds of hours trying to understand what was great about Hayward Field and what wasn't, because it's not perfect. And my final analysis, which I presented both to Vin Lanana and Phil Knight, was that, you know what? What's great about Hayward Field is the intimacy, especially the East Grandstands. The East Grandstands don't exist anywhere else in the world. All the old wooden grandstands of that size are gone. It's the last one. It rumbles. People are close to the track. Athletes literally speak of being picked up and swept down that backstretch because of the energy they get from 4,800 people when they're packed in to the East Grandstand. The West Grandstand, great as well, but it just simply isn't the same. And as I was looking at the whole thing, I'm going the West Grandstand is newer. But I remember when that was built, and I don't think even Bill Barman sort of understood architecture well enough to do a great job with that. And they made it too steep. They didn't put any amenities in it because they didn't have any money. And it's actually hard to actually watch the track meet from there, especially like a finish of a race, because everybody stands up. If you're not quick enough, you don't see the finish of the race. If you sit in the West Grandstands, you must have experienced like, whoa, who won? Even though you're right there. So I determined that the smart move here would be to keep the older one, the east side, because Bill Barman used to sit there. Bill Dellinger still sits there. And they know that they can actually see the finish of the race better from the east than on the west. And why is that? Because you get a panoramic view of the entire race. Especially the last 100 meters coming off the Bowerman corner. It's 100 meters to the finish. When you're on the east side, you see the whole progression of the race and you actually see the finish. If you're actually in the west, right next to it, you're too close. The angle's wrong, it's difficult to stand up. A lot of people who sit there are older, maybe they don't stand up quick enough. It's like, it's a problem. The West Grandstand, so I determined the West Grandstand should be torn down. The Bowerman building was never a really well-designed building. It was built, by the way, to block the north wind so that world records in the 100, the 200, and then the long jump and triple jump could stand. Because a lot of times, people will set world records and it'll be 0.2 miles an hour over the allowable. So Bill Bowerman built the Bowerman building primarily to block the wind from the north so that those records, well, he screwed up. The actual building accelerates the wind. There's a little wind shadow right behind it, but right where the meter is, if you don't know track and field, there's a wind meter. It's roughly about at the 20-meter mark from the beginning of the 100 meters before you get to the finish. And that's where all the readings are taken to sort of verify world records. Well, right at that 20-meter mark, I had wind studies done when I was working on this project. The wind studies indicated that the wind comes over the Bowerman building and creates a little wind shadow, so it's no wind right there. But right at the meter, it speeds up. Like the wind going over the top of an airplane wing and the wind going under the airplane wing, you get lift because one's going faster than the other. Problem. So I'm like, okay, so Bowerman building has to go. The West Grandstand has to go. East Grandstand should stay. And there was something else that I thought, I'm like, you know what, it would be really cool to design an uber modern West Grandstand that had all the modern amenities for fans. And it actually was more amphitheater-like, so it curved away from the track a little bit. And because there's not really much space before you get to the intramural fields behind the West Grandstand, you can't build it up that tall. That's one reason why it's so steep today. In order to get roughly, 30 rows of seats, it has to be steeper before it overhangs the intramural fields further to the west. So I'm like, yeah. So I figured out a way, through geometry and architectural experience, to sort of curve the grandstand, and then actually have, because it's curving, now when you at either end, you take the seats up, you can take them up 40 seats high and not overhang, because you're at an angle now. Not overhang the intramural fields, and you put more people at the finish and more people at the start, which is really where people like to be if they're going to be on the west side. So that's what drove this design, and it looked really modern and kind of interesting because it had this big swoop to it. And in the saddle of the swoop would be where all the suites would go for VIPs, media, and various other people that maybe need to be in a prime location. Need maybe extra amenities because they're writing or they're filming or whatever. So then, as I was developing this plan and starting to draw it up, and I got the okay to hire architects, like real ones, since I was now a fake one by then. And so SRG architects were hired, and they started to basically execute that concept. And that's the drawings that were shown earlier are part of that early presentation, showing how the West Grandstand gets rebuilt. It's super modern. It's modern and it's shaped for a reason to allow the fans to actually see the race, even though they're closer on the west side. It's also a foil. And in architecture, and it's well understood in design in general, that you can enhance something old by building something new next to it. You build something new next to something old, the old looks even more old and more cool. And conversely, the old structure juxtaposed against the new makes the new look more modern and cool. It's a great trick. It's practiced all over Europe, by the way. Not so much here. We like to tear stuff down a little too often. Now, I want to say right now that Don Peaty made a wonderful presentation about preservation, conservation, and I will just tell you right now, I am not a preservationist as much as I am a modernist.